Mr. Speaker, sir, I move that leave be granted to present the 2022 midterm budget and economic review. The review provides an update on the performance of the economy and the 2022 budget implementation progress during the first half of the year. Taking into account developments during the first half of the year, I'm also tabling the 2022 supplementary estimates of expenditure before this august House in compliance with Section 7, Paragraph 2A of the Public Finance Management Act and Section 9 of the Public Finance Management General Regulations of 2019. Before I proceed with my presentation, Mr. Speaker, sir, let me express my gratitude to His Excellency, the President, Dr. Edwin Mangudya, for the guidance I've received during the implementation of the 2022 national budget, as well as the formulation of the mid-term budget and economic review and supplementary budget. I also recognize the support from the Honorable Vice President, Dr. CGTN Chiwenga, fellow cabinet ministers, line ministries, departments and agencies, including members of this august House, as well as other stakeholders for their valuable input into the formulation of the statement. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the economic developments in the first half of the year. A bit of global information as well as then the domestic economic performance. The domestic economic situation continues to be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, compounded by the recent global tensions, with spillovers being felt across the world through the channels. We call them 3 Fs, the fuel channel, the food channel, and the fertilizer channel, and then the shortages thereof that have also ensued from these global spillovers. The attendant spillover effects have changed the economic outlook both globally and domestically. Mr. Speaker, sir, the above global challenges have resulted in rising commodity prices and inflation worldwide and is dampening global growth prospects. As a result, the IMF has revised downwards global economic growth projections to 3.6%, and just yesterday revised these figures down further to 3.2%. And this is down from an initial projection in January of 4.9%. Recovery in the sub-Saharan Africa region is expected to slow down to 3.8% during 2022, benefiting from high commodity prices and recovery in tourism, but being weighed down by high input costs, particularly for food, fuel, and fertilizers. Mr. Speaker, sir, on the screen you will see a few charts that amplify the message or illustrate the message being communicated. You will see on that screen slide 3, for example, in terms of commodity prices, prices of oil, prices of meat, prices of soybeans, and all those prices are up by at least 20%. Inflation has also become a central cause of concern worldwide, reaching its highest level in more than 40 years for some of the advanced economies, particularly the United States and some European countries. And here I ask you to turn to slide 4. On the screen, you see inflation peaking in 2022. Mr. Speaker, sir, the domestic economy has not been insulated from the global developments, particularly from rising commodity prices and inflation, as well as disruptions on supply chains. As a result, domestic economic growth for the year 2022 has been revised downwards from the 5.5% that we predicted initially down to 4.6%. I repeat, we've downgraded Zimbabwe's growth from 5.5% to 4.6%. And this is reflect the impact of external global environment as well as our unique circumstances, the idiosyncratic factors that bedevil us domestically. The growth has also been weighed down by reduced output from the 2021-2022 agricultural season, while other productive sectors are still projected to register positive growth. Notwithstanding the global and domestic shocks, the country continues to record positive economic growth, an increase in foreign currency receipts, near balanced budget, as well as increasing capacity utilization in the manufacturing sector. The depreciation of the local currency and rising inflation, however, remain a challenge that government has committed to tackling going forward. Let me say a few words about the inflation developments. Mr. Speaker, sir, inflationary pressures experienced during the first half of 2022 saw headline inflation steadily accelerating from 60.7% in January to 191.6% in June 2021. You will see on the screen, Mr. Speaker, slide 6, showing that U-curve where inflation has begun to rise, and latest figure 191.6% as of June being recorded. This has been driven partly by external factors which impacted negatively on input prices of raw materials, food, and liquid fuels. Imported inflation contributed significantly to domestic inflation through cost-push factors, whilst domestically adverse inflationary pressures and exchange rate volatility were the main drivers of inflation. In response, government has since introduced a raft of measures meant to instill confidence, strengthen demand for the local currency, and foster market discipline to contain inflation. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me assure the nation that government is ready to implement further measures necessary in order to restore economic stability. Let me say something about monetary developments. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Central Bank, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, has maintained a tight monetary stance to control inflation and exchange rate pressures. Reserve money stock has increased from 33.6 billion Zimbabwe dollars as of June 2022, largely due to growth in statutory reserves, in line with the thrust of tightening monetary policy. Refer to slide 7 on the screen. You will see the orange, almost pink rather, picture showing the bulk of the monetary stock being statutory reserves. At the end of June 2022, more than 80% of the stock of reserve money was in the form of statutory reserves, while currency issued by the bank and bank's liquidity at the Reserve Bank constituted the balance, the smaller balance. Let me comment on broad money developments. I must say that broad money registered a growth of 245% in May 2022, largely driven by exchange rate depreciation, accounting for over 50% of the increase. The annual growth in broad money was largely driven by increases of 316.9% and 286% in credit to the private sector and net claims on government, respectively. Credit to government, however, is merely an accounting treatment of the drawdowns of the special drawing rights SDRs reserves by government and does not represent actual lending to the government. Let me now say something about the introduction of gold coins as a store of value. Mr. Speaker, sir, government has introduced an instrument that enables investors to store value in both local and foreign currency through the gold coins minted by Fidelity Gold refineries. The gold coins are tradable, they're highly liquid, and can be used as collateral security. Members of the public have been given an option to physically own them or to keep them in safe custody with their bankers. The price of the gold coins will be determined and is being determined by the prevailing international price of gold. I now turn to the balance of payment situation. Mr. Speaker, sir, Merchandise exports and imports increased by 33% and 15% to 3.5 billion and 3.7 billion respectively during the first half of 2022 compared to the same period in 2021. To year end, exports are expected to reach $7.3 billion, spurred by increases in mineral receipts benefiting from the mineral commodity price boom, as well as increases in agriculture and manufactured exports. Similarly, merchandise imports are also projected to reach 8.1 billion, driven by fuel, machinery, and raw material imports. As a result, the country's balance of payments remains favorable, with a current account surplus of $387.1 million having been registered during the first half of 2022. The positive current account performance is envisaged to continue to the remainder of the year, to close at $366.3 million on the back of strong export performance and resilient remittance inflows. If you could turn to slide 8 on the screen, you will see the positive current account position. That line, I think, is green in color, which is in positive territory. I now turn to the public finance developments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker said the 2022 national budget was premised on revenue collections of 850.8 billion Zimbabwe dollars. That's 16.8% of GDP. Expenditures of 968.3 billion Zimbabwe dollars, and a target budget deficit of 76.5 billion Zimbabwe dollars, which is 1.5% of GDP. That was the target for 2022. An audited outturn during the first half indicates a different picture. The outturn in revenue collections is 506.6 billion. You see the slide 9-10, as against the expenditures of 534.5 billion, resulting in a budget deficit of 27.9 billion for the first half of the year, compared to a target of 45 billion Zimbabwe dollars for the first half of the year. Development partners also complemented fiscal resources with an amount of $190 million having been disbursed towards various projects and programs. Of this amount, bilateral partners contributed $164 million, whilst the remainder came from multilateral partners. You see slide 12 on the screen for that further information. I now turn to the state of public debt, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as at the end of June 2022, public and publicly guaranteed debt stood at 1.3 trillion Zimbabwe dollars and 13.2 billion US dollars, comprised of domestic debt and external debt, respectively. I repeat, 1.3 trillion Zimbabwe dollars for domestic debt and 13.2 billion US dollars for foreign debt. That's the state of our public debt, Mr. Speaker. Let me mention something about the arrears clearance and re-engagement agenda or roadmap. The country's external debt continues to burden the economy by restricting access to low-cost, long-term financing required to support the desired medium to long-term growth trajectory. To address this challenge, government has developed the arrears clearance, debt relief and restructuring strategy aimed at restoring debt sustainability. In line with this strategy and roadmap, government will soon host a high-level debt resolution forum with development partners and other stakeholders aimed at building consensus among all stakeholders on the progress and procedures of resolving the country's external debt overhang and arrears clearance. The African Development Bank's president, Dr. Adeshina, Akinwumi Adeshina, has agreed to be the country's champion for the debt resolution and re-engagement process. In his capacity as champion, he will coordinate and chair the forthcoming high-level debt resolution forum. And his work has already begun. He was here a few weeks ago to begin the initial engagement towards this debt resolution process. Let me mention something about budget transparency performance, Mr. Speaker said. Mr. Speaker said the country is doing well in terms of budget transparency and is now ranked number 3 in Africa after South Africa and Benin. Globally, the country is ranked number 41 out of 120 countries according to the International Budget Partnership's IBP latest report. And I must pause here for a minute, Mr. Speaker, and thank you and members of this August House for a very robust budget process over the years, and we keep improving in terms of our budget transparency rankings. Going forward, government will continue to improve in all the 3 pillars of transparency, accountability, and participation as part of our commitment of leaving no one and no place behind in terms of public financial management. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the issue of the supplementary budget. Mr. Speaker, fiscal developments during the first half of the year, characterized by increased revenues and expenditure pressures, have necessitated the revision of the approved 1922. Let me retake. Mr. Speaker, fiscal developments during the first half of the year, characterized by increased revenues and expenditure pressures, have necessitated the revision of the approved 2022 national budget. The revision is necessary to allow spending agencies to meet increasing costs of undertaking originally budgeted programs and projects that will ensure that the 2022 objectives are met. Revenue collections for the year to year end are now projected at 1.7 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. If you could turn to slide 16 for further information. While expenditure is now estimated to end the year at 1.9 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. This is against the approved budget of 968.3 billion Zimbabwe dollars, entailing additional spending of 929 billion Zimbabwe dollars.
How can the supplementary budget be bigger than
Consistent with Section 305, Paragraph 5 of the Constitution, the additional expenditures largely financed by expected additional revenues require approval of Parliament through a supplementary budget.
You are presenting a new budget.
The additional expenditures will go towards the following. And here, if you could turn to slide 18 on the screen, I'll just mention the key items, Mr. Speaker. I referred to in a supplementary budget of 929 billion Zimbabwe dollars. This is how it is going to be split in terms of our proposals. Compensation to employees is 492.8 billion. On the use of goods and services is 163.1 billion. Social benefits will be allocated 61.8 billion. And then acquisition of financial and non-financial assets, largely infrastructure, is being allocated an additional 172.6 billion. And then there's the usual, Mr. Speaker says, usual statutory and constitutional obligations, debt service interest at 3 billion, and then pension contributions at 62.6 billion, and then transfers in terms of the devolution agenda of about 10 billion, and then constitutional and other statutory salaries at about 5 billion. So total additional expenditure of 929 billion. Mr. Speaker said the bulk of the supplementary budget, which is 53%, is going towards employment costs to cushion public servants against increasing cost of living. The balance of the additional resources are going towards meeting government consumables, that's about 18%, capital projects at 19%, and social benefits at 7%. Government remains committed to addressing the welfare of civil servants in a fiscally sustainable manner. The challenges of yesteryear, where the wage bill crowded out other development expenditures, should be avoided in order to create the right conditions for sustainable economic growth that will provide scope for payment of decent salaries to our hard-working civil servants. We are stepping up provision of non-monetary incentives as well in order to improve on the welfare of civil servants. Mr. Speaker, I think it's worth mentioning, perhaps highlighting how much each ministry is going to receive as a line ministry. And here, so Office of the President Cabinet, 47.2 billion, and then Parliament of Zimbabwe, an additional 2.8 billion, Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare, an additional 34.9 billion, Defence and War Veterans Ministry, another 71.5 billion, and then Finance and Economic Development, because of the back pocket we need in terms of anticipated reserves, 127.7 billion. The Audit Office at 1.1 billion, Industry and Commerce at 1.7 billion, and then Land, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Development, another 100.7 billion, Mines and Mining Development, 1.6 billion, Environment, Tourism, Hospitality Industry at 3.6 billion additional resources, Transport and Infrastructure Development, 46.5 billion, Foreign Affairs, International Trade, 3.8 billion, Local Government and Public Works, 12.7 billion, Health and Child Care at 62.2 billion, Primary and Secondary Education, an additional 103.9 billion. Higher education, higher and tertiary education, science and technology, an additional 35 billion. Women's Affairs, Community SME Development, 3.1 billion. Home Affairs and Cultural Change, an additional 61.1 billion. Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, an additional 18.2 billion. Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services, 1 billion. Youth, Sport, Arts and Recreation, an additional 3.8 billion. Energy and Power Development, an additional 2.4 billion. Information, Communication Technology and Courier Services, an additional 4.8 billion. National Housing and Social Amenities, an additional 6.9 billion. Judicial Services Commission, an additional 3.1 billion. Public Service Commission, an additional 48.8 billion. Council of Chiefs, an additional 500 million. Human Rights Commission, an additional 527 million. National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, an additional 390 million. National Prosecuting Authority, an additional 1.5 billion. And Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, an additional 351 million. Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, an additional 32.7 billion. Zimbabwe Gender Commission, an additional 507 billion. The Zimbabwe Land Commission, an additional 4.6 billion, or rather 4.7 billion. Zimbabwe Media Commission, an additional 238 million, and that gives us that total of 851.5 billion. And then the remainder then is the constitutional and statutory budget, which will take us to 929.3 billion as the supplementary budget allocations. With the revised 2022 national budget, ministries of lands, agriculture, fisheries, water and rural development, and primary and secondary education top the list in terms of sector ministries with an additional 100.7 billion and 103.9 billion respectively. On agriculture, the resources are earmarked for grain procurement, preparations for the forthcoming season, and dam construction. For the rest of the votes, the additional funding is meant to meet increased operational costs, the wage bill, and identified projects and programs. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now turn to some revenue measures and measures designed to improve tax administration. Starting with revenue measures. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to revenue measures. Mr. Speaker, the revenue measures that I'm proposing seek to enhance revenue to the fiscus, provide relief to taxpayers, as well as strengthen tax administration. May I thus highlight some of the measures that I am proposing, and this list is not exhaustive. There is more in the thicker document. Revenue-enhancing measures, I'll start with the platinum royalty rate. Mr. Speaker, despite the significant contribution to output and export receipts, the mining sector contributed about 1.2% to GDP in direct taxes to the fiscus in 2021. This is in significant contrast to countries in sub-Saharan Africa, which average 2% during the same period. The low fiscal receipts are attributed in part to a generous royalty regime on some major minerals. A case in point is the royalty rate on platinum, which was reduced from 10% in 2015 to 2.5% in conformity with a court judgment. The reduced rate was subsequently aligned across all platinum producers. Compared to revenues accruing from mining activities and rates charged on other precious minerals and metals, such as gold, the royalty rate on platinum is suboptimal. For example, royalty rates on gold range from 3 to 5%, depending on the international commodity price. Mindful of the fact that the tax regime is the main instrument for sharing benefits from finite minerals and also provides an important source of government revenue, it is necessary to maximize revenue to the fiscus. A royalty rate of 5%, which is in line with other platinum producing countries in Africa, is being proposed effective 1 January 2023. The royalty rate of 5% will also apply to lithium producers with effect from 1 January 2023. Let me turn to some tax relief measures. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the pay-as-you-earn situation. The tax-free threshold was increased to 300,000 Zimbabwe dollars or $1,200 per annum for remuneration earned in local and foreign currency respectively, with effect from January 2022. That's the current situation. Adjustments to wages and salaries in response to macroeconomic developments have resulted in bracket creep on local currency denominated remuneration. I therefore propose to review the tax-free threshold on local currency remuneration from 300,000 Zimbabwe dollars to 600,000 Zimbabwe dollars per annum, and also adjust the tax bands to end at 12 million Zimbabwe dollars from the current 6 million Zimbabwe dollars per annum, above which tax will be levied at a rate of 40% with effect from 1 August 2022. This measure is envisaged to increase disposable income, spare consumption spending, and income for corporates. Let me turn to the bonus tax-free threshold. I also propose to review the local currency tax-free bonus threshold from 100,000 Zimbabwe dollars to 500,000 Zimbabwe dollars with effect from 1 November 2022. Let me turn to the rebate of duty on equipment for scientific research. Mr. Speaker, innovation and research are pillars towards sustainable development and industrialization. The education and training system in Zimbabwe is now geared towards this initiative. In that regard, it is important that local research institutions be capacitated through infrastructure that promotes knowledge, which is adaptive and resilient to common and emerging threats such as climate change, infectious diseases, drug resistance, among others. I therefore propose to introduce a rebate of duty on equipment for use in scientific research imported by institutions approved by the ministries responsible for health, for mining, agriculture, higher and tertiary education. Let me turn to some legislative amendments. There's an item I want to highlight regarding value-added tax in terms of the input tax. Mr. Speaker, sir, current legislation permits businesses to trade in either local or foreign currency. Consistent with this legislative provision, VAT registered operators are compelled to account for tax in the currency of trade. In order to assess the amount of VAT payable or refundable, output tax should be offset against input tax incurred in the same currency. This, however, creates an administrative burden for some VAT registered operators whose sales and purchases are transacted in different currencies. This is particularly common on foreign currency sales of imported goods and services that are liable for import VAT in local currency. I therefore propose to provide VAT registered operators with the option to pay duty in foreign currency to facilitate offsetting of output and input tax in the same currency. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, sir, the global developments and their impact on the domestic economy remind us of the need to upscale domestic production of goods and services in order to increase production and exports as well as to reduce the import bill. The evidence of resilience anchored on strong economic fundamentals such as enhanced capacity to generate adequate foreign currency, decent economic growth, sustainable budget deficit, and current account surplus need to be sustained. The resilience is as a result of sustained economic transformation ushered in by the new dispensation in the form of sound fiscal and monetary policies, increased investment in infrastructure and other productive sectors, governance reforms, ease of doing business reforms, and engagement and re-engagement drive. The depreciation of the local currency and rising inflation is a challenge that government is tackling and hence require the support of all stakeholders and citizens. I finally commend the 2022 midterm budget and economic review and supplementary estimates of expenditure to this august House. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Tinokutendai siyabonga talumba. Mr. Speaker, sir, with your indulgence, sir, as is now perhaps a new tradition, I also use this opportunity to table before this august House the 2023 budget strategy paper. Just to table it, not for debate, but this is our key consideration document for the 2023 budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to present to this august House the 2023 budget strategy paper BSP, which outlines proposed priorities for the forthcoming 2023 national budget. The BSP will facilitate public, stakeholder and parliamentary consultations and engagements on the policy priorities for the 2023 national budget and meant to respond to the difficult global and domestic economic environment. Just to summarize, the past 4 years have witnessed positive transformation and structural changes across all sectors, including agriculture, mining, and infrastructure, among others, and provides a strong platform for sustainable economic growth. The budget strategy paper BSP profiles policy interventions expected to support the positive economic growth trajectory experienced to date and expand the country's productive capacity, accelerate economic transformation, and build the resilience of the economy against adverse shocks. Hence, the theme of the BSP is accelerating economic transformation. The BSP has 9 priorities drawn from the 15 themes. Some of the priorities include economic growth and macroeconomic stability, supporting productive value chains, infrastructure, ICT, and the digital economy, youth, sports, arts and culture, women, gender equity, SMEs and war veteran support, devolution and decentralization, human capital development, well-being and innovation, effective institution building and governance, and finally, image building, engagement and re-engagement. So these will focus on these above areas. The economy is projected to continue on the growth trajectory.
Point of order. You don't know what is happening. Mr. Speaker, sir, what the Honourable Minister of Finance is doing is procedural, is unprocedural. We came here, Mr. Speaker, sir, to listen to the supplementary budget and the mid-term review. We did not come here to listen to any strategy from the Minister of Finance. We want to stick to what we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In terms of the Public Finance Management Act, the Honourable Minister is in order to table this budget.
You can table on the 16th of August.
Thank you.
The nature of table is determined by the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Very pleased to continue. I'm about to conclude. So with the focus on the areas that I mentioned, the economy is projected to continue on a growth trajectory with a projected growth rate of 5% in 2023. This growth is expected to benefit from the favorable international commodity prices, stable macroeconomic environment, and improved production in all sectors of the economy. Government's policy thrust of maintaining a sustainable fiscal position will be maintained and sustained in order to support structural reforms required to ensure inflation and exchange rate stability. The target is to maintain a budget deficit below 3% of GDP during 2023 with strict control on consumption expenditures in order to provide more resources towards development expenditures such as infrastructure and social services. I therefore have the honor to table the budget strategy paper before this August House. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Tinotendai siyabonga twalumwa.
Why are you claiming if I might interject?
Order.
Wait.
Now, in all fairness to the honourable members, I think it will be in order
We are ready to debate.
that the honourable members get hold of the documents from the paper office,
We are ready, Mr. Speaker.
and you may be one of the few lucky ones.
Okay.
You may be prophetic. Get the necessary documentation from the paper office. We have about 2 weeks in which to go through the papers as a document, and when we resume our sitting, I want to believe that we shall have some form of debate. On that score, I will ask the Honourable Minister to move for the agenda. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Let's reject this.
Mr. Speaker, they arise to move that the debate do now adjourn. Thank you.
That debate adjourned. Order. It has been moved that the debate be now adjourned. Is there a debate?
Yes.
Debate, yes! Debate!
Order. Honorable. Martin. Wait, hold fire. Go and get the documents and read them.
We have written down
I now put the question that the debate now then those who have that opinion say aye. Sometimes it's good to laugh so that it goes down.
Sometimes it's good to read.
To the 16th of August, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Very much.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn. Yes, I am connected. Mr. Speaker, do you hear me now? Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do not adjourn.
Order, please take your seat. The government chief witness has explained to me why we should adjourn now, and I have acceded. Who second the adjournment of the House? Any objection? It has been moved that the House will now adjourn. Is there debate? I put the question that the House will now adjourn. Those who are say aye. Those of the contrary opinion will say no. No. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, to the 16th of August.
Was I Speaker?
What is the text on done?
2%. So platinum 5%. Ah,
As is tradition, the Speaker's procession is observed in silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May you have a nice break.
I'm going to deal with them for 2 weeks now.
Society namasa.
I'm going to deal with them.
PC.
Can you stand up, my friend?
Cheers. See you in 2 weeks' time. I'm listening about what I know.
Mr. Mediaco, the free statement.